Welcome to episode 5 of the SES course, where we'll be demonstrating how to run a consensus node. In this episode, we will guide you through the process of setting up a consensus node. If you're not familiar with what a SES consensus node is, please refer to episode 4, where we discuss the various nodes that form the SES network. This episode is based on the SES consensus node documentation available at doc.ses.network. So if you don't understand anything, please feel free to follow our documentation. Let's start off with our system requirements. To run a consensus node, there are some minimum system requirements, like the recommended OS is Ubuntu 64-bit version 20.04 or higher, with at least 4 CPU cores. The system should also support Intel SGX with Flexible Launch Control or FLC. For some systems, you will also need at least 16 gigabytes of RAM and a minimum bandwidth of 5 megabytes per second. Also, for the mainnet, as the network grows, consensus nodes may require 10 megabytes per second of network bandwidth. The server will also need a public IP and a Linux kernel version 5.11 or higher. Prerequisites. Intel SGX can be enabled from BIOS. For this, you'll need to follow the manufacturer's BIOS manual to enable SGX. For some hardware, the Intel SGX can be enabled through software, which is included in our SES client tool. Most Intel ME and SPS support Intel SGX, so the recommended models are Intel E, Intel E3, Celeron, and Core series CPUs, with Intel Core i5-10500 being the optimal choice. The recommended motherboard for BIOS is from Supermicro. You will also need to know your static public IP, which can be obtained by executing curl-4 ipconfig.co. Lastly, we will also need 2 SES wallet accounts, one for stashing or staking 3 million SES tokens, and the other for the controller with at least 100 SES tokens for paying transaction fees. If you have followed our previous episode, you may have already created these accounts. Consensus node operational capacity. The consensus node can be configured to run in 3 operational capacities: full node, verifier node, and marker node. First, let's discuss the full node and verifier node within the SES network. A full node is a fully capable consensus node equipped with all necessary functions. It generates random challenges, verifies data, computes tags, and generates and replaces spaceholder data. Additionally, it actively participates in network consensus and requires binding to consensus nodes for registration. A verifier node primarily handles random challenges for idle and service data and participates in network consensus. It also requires binding to consensus nodes for registration. To operate either as a full or a verifier node, there are certain requirements. Stash account. The stash account keeps all the funds you want to stake. It requires at least 3 million TSES for staking, which can be funded by the node owner or delegated by other users. The stash account bounds or unbalanced funds and designates the controller account to manage these funds. Controller account is responsible for paying gas fees for staking-related transactions and registration. It takes actions on behalf of the bonded funds in the stash account, but cannot move bonded funds out of the stash account. Next, we move on to the marker node within the SES network. A marker node is responsible for computing tags for the user's service data, creating, verifying, and replacing idle data segments, and serving a designated storage node cluster. Unlike full and verifier nodes, a marker node can be registered independently and does not require binding to consensus nodes for registration. Operating as a marker node does not increase reputation points. To operate as a marker node, only one account is required and there is no need for a binding funds operation. This makes the marker node simpler to set up and operate compared to full and verifier nodes. Now that you are familiar with the requirements and prerequisites of a consensus node, let's move on to the next video where we will learn the step-by-step guide to set up a consensus node.